All right, our next talk is from Debbie Aller, and Debbie is a soil scientist with Cornell, and she is leading the Cornell Soil Health Program. And so she is going to talk to us about healthy soils for healthy fruit. Thanks, Debbie.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anna.
You have the pointer over there, and
I have a pretty loud extension voice myself. Hopefully you can hear me even without this. No, yeah, got it. Perfect. That's why we need it. How do I put this on? This one?
you can wear it on your neck, but make sure the mic is up near your mouth, or you can wear it on your ears if you want.
I think this is good enough, but I have to stay away from the owl, of course, right?
Yes.
So,
This is the first time they've used the microphone system since it's been fixed, so we're the guinea pigs. Thanks for being patient, everybody.
perfect. Yeah, so hopefully everyone on Zoom can hear me then with that. And thanks, Anna, and the whole IPM team for the invitation to be here with you all today. I'm very much used to speaking to a crowd of farmers who usually don't engage at all. But Master Gardener community support crowd is a very different group, which I absolutely love speaking to as well. And so, as Anna mentioned, I'm a soil scientist by training. And for the last 6.5 years, I've been working back in New York State within extension and outreach. First down on Long Island, out in Riverhead in Suffolk County with CC down there. And then 2.5 years ago, I moved up to the mothership of Cornell University in Ithaca. And I joined the New York Soil Health team. So now I work statewide. And I work across commodities, but mainly focus on perennial fruit crops, vegetable crops, and our urban agriculture as well. And I focus a lot on organic amendments, mainly biochar and compost, which I'll mention in a little bit too. But because of my work in perennial fruit crops, mainly with our commercial growers, our apple and vineyard growers across New York State, I'll be sharing a little bit of my knowledge with you all today. And hopefully it's at a level that makes sense. Unfortunately, I do have a lot of commercial production pictures and not so many food stores, home garden pictures, but we kind of think about it on the scale of your production and your level. But many of the same concepts hold true. Whether we're thinking about 1 or 2 trees versus 100 acres of plants as well. And so as part of my role, I go around the state talking about soil health. I do a lot of on-farm trials, a lot of applied research, and just extension and outreach about what soil health is, what opportunities there are for to improve it, and thinking about that across all different commodities. And then the other hat I wear is for the last 2.5 years, I've been a part of the US Biochar Initiative. And so when this gentleman mentioned biochar, we just had a field day 2 days ago over in Columbia County. And pretty much I think in addition to my colleague Johannes Lehman at Cornell, we do a lot of work on biochar. I just grabbed these from the car just because I had them. There's a lot of interest in biochar right now. I field a lot of questions from our CCE educators across the state, Soil and Water, NRCS, about biochar. So I'm very happy to, don't want to go open up that rabbit hole, that can of worms with biochar, because I can talk for days and days about it. But if there are specific questions, I'd be happy to address those, because I know there's a lot of interest in it right now. And I typically am getting the questions anyway. So to already go with 5 minutes of my talk, I just want to show first this picture, which was hidden behind the text there, the title of a farm out in Western New York. This is a Concord grape grower. And looking at the same soil type, but managed completely differently. When we're talking about soil health, we're really going to be talking about soil management, and I'll get to that. So how many people think on your left, which one's the better soil from a healthy standpoint, and why? Left. Okay, great. I'm glad all in agreement, right, from the get-go. So just from looking at this picture, why would you say that? The roots. Air. Okay, I can't see the air, but pores, right? Pores, roots, pores. Compaction on the right. Great. So those are all really important indicators of soil health. that we think about. And so when we go from below ground, and so I'm someone who thinks, you know, there's a lot going up on above ground and we're all used to seeing that. But there's a lot happening below our feet that we don't talk about, right? And it's really the foundation for the health of our plants, our landscape, our trees, everything. But this is what it looks above ground. And so I know, obviously with pesticides, there's a lot of issues, and from the homeowner, master gardener level, you know, we really are trying to minimize or absolutely do no sprays, right? You know, production agriculture is very different when you're trying to manage a single crop on hundreds of acres. Pest issues are a much bigger issue. So I just wanted to go from showing you what it would look like below ground to what's happening above ground. And so the picture on the right is very common, traditionally used of just spraying the entire vineyard, keeping it bare to basically not have weeds compete with the growing cash crop. But there's been a shift a lot in education, a lot of interest, a lot of demands from markets about improving sustainability within our agricultural systems, right? As well as making them more resilient to the impacts of climate change, which have already been mentioned some today. Thinking about extreme weather events, these 2, 3, 4-inch rainfall events we're getting just in a couple-hour period. And so basically establishing cover crops as a simple way, keeping the soil covered, really helps protect the soil from wind erosion, water erosion. It helps keep that moisture in the soil when we have these prolonged dry spells, particularly in the summer. So we're seeing this difference above ground, and that is translating to differences below ground. And I think that's really important. So I'm just doing that as one example to start. But I want to go back. What is soil? Anyone here can provide me with a definition of soil, right? We talk about it, but what is it? Earth. It's earth, okay. Organic matter, one component, yes. Minerals, microbes, air. Wow, I like this group. This is great. Okay, so here's one definition. There are many out there, but this is a very well-known one from a great intro to soils textbook from Brady and Weil. But it's a dynamic natural body composed of mineral and organic solids, gases, liquids, and living organisms that can serve as a medium for plant growth. And I highlight and read some of those key words, some of the words that people mentioned here, but it's dynamic, so it's changing, right? It's not a static system. It's composed of all 3 phases of matter: solids, liquids, and gases. People have mentioned air, minerals, the solids, right? Water, liquids, we know how important that is for plant growth, and living organisms, right? It's living, and that's a critical thing when we talk about soil. And it can serve as a medium for plant growth, but it also serves many other functions from our day-to-day life. Water filtration, antibiotics, foundation for the room we're standing in right now, this building, right? But the properties we want for soil when we're constructing on it are the exact opposite of what we want for our plant roots to grow in. But soil is this three-phase system, as I mentioned. Pretty much in a healthy soil, about 50% is our mineral fraction, our solids, which is here in the brown, a component of air and water. So having pore space is critical. Healthy soil without pore space, because we need air and water in there, which are critical for organisms. And organic matter, right? Organic matter is already getting mentioned today. That's typically a very small fraction. In agricultural systems, between about 5 to 7%. It's often significantly higher in landscape systems, also in urban soils, which are typically very compost based or heavily amended soils. But that small fraction is incredibly important for productivity and for life in the soils, which I'm going to mention in a little bit. Soil texture, I think, and I hope everyone here knows what their soil is. Danny was saying in her talk, heavy clay soil. But soils are incredibly diverse, and they can vary widely across the landscape. So you could be here planting a tree 10 feet away. You could then shift from a clay soil to a sandy loam, for example. So soil testing is critically important. And I'm gonna mention that soon, but soil is a habitat, right? I've already said several times the living system, but we can think of it like a house, right? And so right now, the house is our structure, right? We have walls, we have a roof, but all the fun stuff is happening in the roofs, in the floor space, right? And so it's a kind of a cheesy analogy, but it's the same thing, having soils that have good soil structure, good aggregation, that have pores where you can have air and water is incredibly important. So why things like disturbing the soil, like tillage, or not keeping the soil covered with cover crops or mulches, which we're going to talk about, and not having space for the biology are reasons why we deplete and we degrade our soil over time. And so we need those pores to have the life in our soil. And so how many people have seen this barrel before? When we talk about soil fertility, soil nutrition? Okay, a couple hands raised. If you haven't heard of this before, I'm not necessarily surprised. It's really something used within production agriculture, kind of the soil fertility world or soil nutrition. But for a long time, soils have been talked about the chemistry. And this barrel, which depicts the Liebig's law of the minimum. And basically this idea that the most limiting nutrient in our soil is what's limiting productivity, whatever that is. So on the side here, it says sulfur, potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, calcium. It says nutrients, right? And we know there are nutrients that are required in larger concentrations, right? Our macronutrients and then our micronutrients. So typically N, P, and K, our nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, are our macronutrients required by plants in the largest quantities, right? But whatever is the lowest on the barrel is limiting our productivity. This was a historical thought when we're talking about soils, was this focus on the chemistry, on the fertility. And when you look at standard nutrient tests today, you see a chemical analysis, right? You get your nutrient analysis, you get a pH, you get recommendations for lime, something like that. More recently, in the last several decades, and through a lot more research and our analytical capabilities and just our awareness and understanding, we've had this shift to this soil health idea, which a much more holistic systems level thinking of our soil. And really thinking about soils as the integration of not just the chemical properties, which we know about, but the physical and biological properties. And the fact that these are all connected can really drive a healthy, productive soil system and lead to healthy plants. And actually, this is a picture of biochar soil right there. Because I was sampling in an orchard over in the Lake Ontario fruit region. And just by burning of the trees before reestablishing the orchard, they kind of had produced natural biochar, which is a very recalcitrant form of carbon. But hopefully many people have seen or heard of this idea of the soil food web, but really getting at the point that soil biology is the main driver of a healthy soil plant system. And that's because things like the nitrogen cycle, which is a very complex cycle, but really at the fundamental level, nitrogen availability to plants, which is important, it's a biologically mediated process. So if we don't have biology, if we don't have life in the soil, the nutrients our plants need are not available to them. And so having diversity, having those legumes that Danny mentioned, having life in the soil really helps boost the resiliency of those plants and just make them not require excess fertility, for example, because there's a lot of just biological controls happening in that system. And so when we historically, or this idea of soil health, it really divides this idea that we have inherent properties of the soil. Up in the Thousand Islands, right? Heavy clay soil. Western New York, heavy clay soil. Down on Long Island, very sandy soil. So soil texture is an inherent property of the soil. It's something we cannot change, right? Yes, you can heavily amend it with compost. You can change it, but overall texture is an inherent property. And this these inherent properties are essentially thought of kind of these 5 soil forming factors, if anyone has heard of that. This minerals, that's texture, climate. You know, we have much warmer conditions down on Long Island, cooler conditions up in the Adirondacks and the North Country. Biology, relief, and time. These are all factors that have led to certain properties and distinguished soils just naturally. And this idea of dynamic soil quality, and these are changes in soil properties that happen because of our influence, because of essentially anthropogenic land use decisions and changes to what we decide to grow. And so when we're talking about soil health, we're really focusing on this management. What can we change as gardeners, as homeowners, as farmers to improve the health of the soil? And so this takes kind of what I said in a more kind of infographic image developed by one of my colleagues, Valentina Rubio. But this idea, we have these inherent properties, we can't change it. I have that heavy clay soil. I have a heavy clay soil. I'm not going to have a sandy loam. Or if I have a hillside on my land, that's going to affect everything. What crops we choose to grow, we have some control over, right? Some things might just not grow within our climatic conditions, within our plant hardiness zone. So we might be subject to growing certain types of plants, but we can have a lot of diversity within the level of production that all of us in this room are talking about. This differs a little bit from a more production agricultural standpoint. So that's why we say limited control, but it's this management once again, how much we irrigate, how much we fertilize, how much we disturb the soil. If we don't decide to mulch, if we decide to plant cover crops, we can control this, and this is going to have an influence on the health of our soils. I got to speed up, I know. So the soils are not dirt. And as a soil scientist, right, it's really cheesy, but people are like, oh, just go out in the dirt, whatever. No, it's soil, right? Because it's living, and it's important to think about it from that perspective. I've said that before, but what we do on the surface impacts the environment around us, and that's really important. But with all that diversity, the need for different management practices changes across that landscape. But I think it's really important that we manage our soils. We know what we're working with. Before then, we make decisions about plants, amendments, fertility, anything like that. And so I always say, you need to know what you're working with. How many people garden here? How many people know their soils? Okay, that was pretty good, actually. Often there are a lot fewer people, yeah, I garden, but I don't know what I'm working with. If you don't know what you're working with, how do you know what to do? How do you know how much fertilizer to apply? How much do you know which plants to apply? Yes, from a plant hardiness zone, we can say, but we're talking about that some plants might do better in sandier conditions or wetter conditions, clayier conditions than others, right? And so soil testing, we're just, if you don't want to even send a sample, but often CCE offices are really great at helping with this, even at the basic level. But starting to know what you're working with, so you know kind of what you need to prepare a site before investing thousands of dollars in plants. Figuring out, do I have a low-lying spot on my landscape that I need to think about managing differently than the hilltop? These are all kind of questions and can help decrease any unnecessary applications of fertilizers, or for those who are spraying, potentially pesticides as well. I'm not gonna hang on to this slide too much, but basically at Cornell, it was the first commercial, over several decades of research and understanding. It's the first commercially available soil health test in the world, launched in 2006. Has anyone sent soil for a Cornell soil health test before? Cool, that more than I thought. So basically, we need to be able to measure soil health to be able to manage it once again. And so what this does is it, at the top, It uses kind of this stoplight system. Sorry for all the colorblind folks, we need to think about that. But basically, it utilizes 4 indicators of physical soil properties, 4 indicators of soil biological properties, and then your normal soil nutrient tests. And so it's this idea of looking at the soil as a system and getting indicators and overall scores on all these different soil properties to help better target management decisions for growers. And so what the Cornell Soil Health Test, or CASH test for short, what it does is it ties soil indicators, something like aggregate stability, which is the most widely used physical indicator of soil health, and compaction, for example, or soil organic matter. It connects this indicator that we can measure in the lab with an actual soil process. Thinking about aggregate stability, its ability to resist dispersion, its ability to allow for infiltration of water, surface crusting, germination of new seedlings, rooting throughout the soil profile, and ability to mitigate runoff and erosion. So a simple, I shouldn't say simple, but a single physical soil health indicator is tied to many, many processes that are happening in the field and across the landscape. If you don't want to send a sample to a lab, they're really great ways. I've just put this up there as reference because you all have access to this, of semi-quantitative soil health indicators, just to get an idea of within your own landscape, within your own garden. You know, how quickly does the residue on my soil break down? That can be linked to organic matter, penetration resistance. So you might have seen a CC educator or others, master gardeners I know, maybe you've seen a penetrometer, a soil compaction tester. Those cost a couple $100 and can be limiting for a homeowner or a farmer. You might not want your own. You can often take them out for loan from CC offices or soil and water offices. But you could use a simple metal stake or flag and get an idea of compaction. If you can't push a metal rod through the soil, think about what's happening with the plant roots and the tree roots. They're not able to get down there either. If they can't explore the soil profile, they're not getting water, they're not getting nutrients in that area either. So there's just some very simple in-field indicators you can start to look at just by feeling the soil. Taking a shovel, digging around a little bit and getting some sense of what's happening. So what are some ways to improve soil health? And Anna, keep me on track.
4 or 5 minutes.
Perfect. I have a lot of pictures coming up. So what are some ways to improve soil health? And like I said, I have several pictures from like commercial production, but I do have some from landscape and smaller farms as well. But diversity, right? I feel like this has been a theme across all the talks today, is diversifying across the landscape. And I think this is something that's not new for this group, but this is really foundational from a soil health standpoint. The more diversity, if we have diversity above ground, we're having diversity above ground as well. There are different fungal bacterial populations that really, if there's some type of invasion, can help battle, helps basically increase our immunity, right? If we ate cheeseburgers every day, we probably have issues. We need diversity. Keeping the soil covered. How this looks in production agriculture with cover crops. In this case, this is yellow mustard, which is really good for biofumigation. Kind of a natural pesticide in a way against nematodes and things like that. This is tillage radish. But at the smaller scale, the home garden scale, the landscape scale, thinking about organic residues do I have around. I love what Danny said in her talk too. You just kind of let the leaves fall. That's your organic mulch right there. That's your organic matter going back into your soil. Often when I'm talking with homeowners and things like that, people spend thousands of dollars getting the leaves blown off their yard in the fall. And then pay $1,000 for fertilizer to be added to their lawns and landscapes in the summer. I'm like, did you think about that, right? You just paid for someone to take your nutrients to then add them back in a synthetic form. So your nutrients are right there, especially at the garden landscape scale. You know, it might differ in urban environments, but particularly maybe in our more rural areas where we have access to mulches, we have access to leaf material. These are incredible from a fertility standpoint, right? And that natural cycle of organic matter in these systems. So keeping the soil covered, using these, if you can't get a cover crop in the ground, and everyone knows what a cover crop is, right? Yeah, cool. Sometimes, oh, if I'm harvesting a crop late, even on a raised bed, I can't get a cover crop in the ground. Put some leaf mulch over it, put some straw mulch over it, keep it covered throughout the winter. Very important. This was at 2 minutes, perfect. An orchard I was at yesterday, just in Schoharie County, a small orchard block, but this idea of keeping the soil covered in a production system. Minimize disturbance, once again. So these rototilling is probably more in the context here, but even can we limit rototilling, potentially broad forking? This can be important for the incorporation of amendments and things like that. But anytime we can really minimize the disturbance of the soil, that really helps from the soil health capacity. Soil amendments, this is my favorite topic typically, but I have 2 slides on it. All these different amendments and mulches. This was just using woody mulch in raspberries here over garlic. If anyone grows garlic, just kind of a strong over winter, right? This all protects the soil and it adds organic matter when it decomposes. Mulching and tree fruit. This is something I'm working a lot with our commercial orchard growers, is how can we start to utilize woody mulches to a greater extent and move away from the herbicide strip that people so often see when they go to orchards and vineyards. Compost, everyone here knows about compost, don't need to say more about that. Compost teas can be great. There can be a lot of variability between batches, so if you're purchasing these, just be aware of that. Biochar, the slide for you. I have some examples here, but I'm happy to, I'll stick around for a little bit of lunch and then I'm gonna head back to Ithaca after that, but happy to answer questions if people have specific questions about biochar and other amendments. And I'm gonna take 1 more minute, Anna, I apologize. But mention some opportunities there are. Because one thing I found in my research working with perennial fruit growers is that we need to think about soil health differently than annual cropping systems. And soil health opportunities that exist for already established perennial crops differ than new plantings, what we can do. And so just some things here for established, if you already have established small orchard on your land or crops out there. Utilizing mulches. This was an image from Mow and Blow in a vineyard of mowing and then discharging that organic residue under the vines to get that organic matter back and away from the herbicide strip, which is bare and not living. Minimize disturbance, living roots, cover crops. If you can't get the living roots in there, getting an organic mulch on it, great. And it is still important that we're within the appropriate pH range of the crops they're planting, and they have accurate nutrients. So the chemistry is still an important part of the equation, but it's not everything. Similar ideas for our new perennial fruit plantings, but I'd say the biggest thing is this add organic matter. There are far more opportunities to get organic matter down into the root system before establishing trees. Than after they've already been established. Seen a lot of benefit from kind of trenching or getting compost and biochar down into the planting hole or the row that you're planting. It can do a lot more from the soil health standpoint and just like a root development standpoint than just kind of using it as a top dress or kind of surface applying it after the plants have been established. My take home messages, I've already said all of these, so just have them as reference. There's my contact information, my email there, and there's a lot of soil health resources on our website, newyorksoilhealth.org. Another really great one, which I think is, I sent it to Anna, it will be in the box PDF. But there are hard copies available too for a fee. The PDF version is completely free. Building Soils for Better Crops. It was written by my supervisor at Cornell. Really great reference material, written, in, I think, very easily digestible language. So I encourage everyone to get a copy from the SARE website, if they would like, but.
Can you say the title again?
Sorry, Building Soils for Better Crops, Ecological Management for Healthy Soils. There's just a lot of great reference material. It talks about a lot of the concepts I very briefly mentioned here. And it's in a language, I think, that's great for master gardeners, for people who have a reasonable foundation, in crop production and soils. So really great reference. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Betty. It's such good information. I never want to cut anybody off. And this group is so into it. I really appreciate that. We'll take one question really quick, okay? Yeah, over here.
Yeah.
In regards to compost, which most people seem to use a lot of bagged compost. Does anybody regulate any of that? And what are you getting when you buy a bag of topsoil?
I don't know, it's a quick question.
Can you repeat it really quick?
So the question is about compost, quality of compost and what you're really getting, in a bag of compost topsoil that you purchase. And does anyone regulate, this? Wow, it's a really great question. And so compost quality is incredibly important. I've seen people put on bad quality compost before and they run into more issues and then they just didn't put compost on at all. So there are, more standards, the US Composting Council. I'd certainly look for the US Composting Council kind of seal, when purchasing compost. I've purchased bagged compost before myself or topsoil, and often it's bagged before it's actually ready. One of the distinguishing features, I think, with compost when it is mature is the starting organic materials are not distinguishable. You can't tell what went into that original pile of raw materials, the greens and the browns you put in. So if you start seeing woody materials and twigs and other things that haven't broken down, they're typically bagging their compost before it's actually mature. It may have reached that thermophilic phase to break down weed seeds and harmful bacteria, but it's not really at the rate for or it's really not ready for application yet. And so they're not standards like there are for the fertilizer industry and things like that. There's a wide variety of quality that's available on the market. And so I always recommend, find a high quality source, ask the supplier for a compost report. Talk with your CCE. I've given talks a lot on like how to interpret compost reports, and there's things that are available online. For what do these numbers mean? Whether you're purchasing compost or biochar, I always recommend to growers to ask the supplier for the report. There's certain indicators on there that it might be out of whack. The moisture is not correct. The carbon to nitrogen ratio is not correct. You can kind of tell sometimes that it's not mature. And then when you get a compost, if it smells bad, doesn't look broken down, probably not good to put on your soil just yet. You might need more time. So it's kind of a wild west on the organic market. Sorry, that doesn't really answer your question, but I can talk too much about it. So thank you.
Thank you again, Betsy.